I was just like, why is this happening? My greatest fear was for my husband to leave me after 10 years of marriage, the way that my dad and my mom separated. And that's exactly what happened.
Hey guys, and welcome to Little Black But 91 is your favorite dating relationship coach. Yes, we're talking to you guys about Meagan Good and talking about Devon Franklin. We're answering this question: what actually happened? Why did they actually break up? What actually caused the divorce? I think I got a little bit of an answer for you. Look, let me tell you something about relationships, at least from my perspective. Meagan Good talks about obviously how for her, she came into understanding that, God pretty much told her who her husband was. Well, if God tells you who your husband is, then surely it should work, right? And surely actually it should, be in a place where, it will be perfect and you never break up. But the reality of the situation is relationships have to be maintained. And the work that we do within the relationship is actually what's going to cause us to actually stay in it or break up. I think the reason why Devon Franklin and Meagan Franklin actually broke up is because of their fears, right? Their major fears of what? Abandonment, right? Because Devon Franklin, his father passed away when he was 16. He was one youngest of three. He grew up around his grandma, his mum, and seven other strong women, as well as his granddad and his uncle. Became a preacher at 15. We're gonna go really deep into this. Meagan Good, her father and her mother broke up, divorced. He pays child support, she says, and she grew up in a household with her mother, right? Both households had a disappearing factor of a parent, and that can actually birth what we call a fear of abandonment trauma. And this actually leads into what we call attachment styles, where we can talk about dismissive avoidant versus fearful avoidant. I'm going to supplicate that to you by showing you some clips and hopefully have a conversation around it as well. And I'm going to break it all the way down for you guys as well. So let's stay tuned. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, click on that bell button for notification uploads. We appreciate you. It's about to get deep real quick. So stick with me because we're going to have a real conversation. All right, let's go.
Wanted me to do next, and in that prayer, he literally told me who my husband was. He told me that it was tomorrow.
Okay, so you hear her quite clearly say to us, she knew who her husband was. It was Devon Franklin. She says this in so many different interviews. It's not new. It's not new news. It is something that has always been said, right? And I think that's really important because that's a good, strong foundational beginning. Because when I heard the conversation between Devon Franklin and Meagan Good, she had that news from way early, which means God, I don't disbelieve it. I believe God was in the situation. We can do a separate video about that. God was in the situation. Then obviously they end up, kind of meeting again later on down the line. They start dating. He says, okay, this is the kind of woman I want to be with. But, at first he wasn't sure because he didn't want to date an actor. Okay, cool. Totally understand, right? And so these things happen. We have our ideas and life, God changes that, right? So how do we get to a point where we're at the point of divorce? Well, we have to be able to go all the way back to the very beginning. I'm going to explain something to you guys to make it very, very clear. My synopsis or thesis in this situation is using the framework of attachment styles. Attachment style simply is the way that we actually connect in a relationship, right? How we emotionally connect. There are 4 attachment styles, right? This is done by John Bowlby, which is then further, his work was then further enhanced by Mary Ainsworth. And what in essentially the attachment styles is how you connect in a relationship. There is 4, secure, there is anxious preoccupied, and then there is dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant. We're going to focus on fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant because I think that is essentially what's happening here. The anxious attachment style is concerned with not being rejected and works to prove that they are worthy of love. The avoidant attachment avoids emotional connections, doesn't like too much emotions, and tends to ghost, quote unquote, and is afraid of being rejected. And then we have the fearful avoidant attachment style, which is really about feeling unlovable, right? Almost not feeling worthy, I'm feeling unlovable. And so what ends up happening is the fearful avoidant both has the anxious and the dismissive traits, and they literally oscillate between the two. So if you're a bit dismissive, you'll meet the fearful avoidant and they may become more anxious. If you're more anxious and you meet a fearful avoidant, they may become more avoidant, depending on the scenario and the situation. I think we've got Meagan Good and Devon Franklin here being a dismissive and a fearful avoidant. Who is who? We can discuss that maybe a little bit later on, but reality of the situation is I do believe that they both have a fear of abandonment, which is actually one of the core wounds as to what comes with attachment styles. Now, let's go into something as to prove what I'm trying to talk about here, right? This part of the conversation was between Devon Franklin on Praise by Fabian Morris. Great interview, by the way. Loved his style as well. But listen to the conversation that actually happens as well, because this is now a part of conversation where they start talking about Devon Franklin's upbringing. And this is very important. We deal with roots here, not the symptoms. We want to deal with the roots to be able to understand what's going on. Listen very carefully to how he has interpreted relationships.
My father passing, kind of how I felt about that, and kind of the isolation that it created, and the distance, and creating a distance between me and intimacy. I think it took years for me to finally get to a place where I could be open enough and to receive the gift of my wife. And
let's pause it right there. What did he just say? He just said the passing of his father, which was around about 16, he was one of the youngest of three, caused him, right, to go into a place of isolation, and really to actually begin to stay away from intimacy. Right? So because his father's passing happened, he now looked at intimacy as, I don't want to get close. Why? There's a fear of loss. And whenever we have a fear of loss, okay, we have a fear of abandonment, right? And so what that ends up doing is he's now saying, I'm going to avoid, this is why we call it dismissive avoidant. We dismiss our emotions and then we avoid emotional situations and connections. We avoid getting close. Now, remember, he was celibate for 10 years. So now I start realizing maybe that celibacy wasn't just him being genuinely celibate. Now, of course, we know that he had a little bit of a fumble. We all do. I mean, I can't talk. You know my history. And so he had a fumble. He had a 10-year period where he didn't have no sex, right? But I wonder how much intimacy he had, right? And this is really important because you can avoid sex all you want and call it celibacy. But if you're avoiding also intimacy with people, getting close to people, then you're going to also struggle when you get into a relationship, because that wound hasn't been solved and it hasn't been actually nurtured very well, hasn't been healed, right? Just avoiding sex doesn't mean I'm actually getting intimate with other people. Remember, how is it you've been 10 years celibate, but he still struggled in the area of being able to receive his wife in the gift of his wife in the relationship? Well, quite simply put, it's because he had problems with intimacy. Not sex, intimacy. What do I mean by that? Well, we're talking about how we emotionally connect with each other, right? And you guys have seen me put it on before. Well, I've given you guys a whole list of like the emotional connections, when it and the 12 steps of them, which I use a lot of the times with my clients. If you're one of my clients, I've used this probably on you recently as well, right? And essentially what that actually is the ways that we actually connect, right? We want to connect with people in a way, and I'm going to show you this to you actually, so I'm going to get it on the screen. We like to connect with people in a way that enables us to be able to feel safe. A whole relationship is based on the emotional connection. Real relationships that are going to last long have emotional connection. Without it, we will not be able to have the relationship that you want to have. Not a healthy one anyway. So I'm going to bring this onto the screen for you guys, okay? Here's my little... my notes here on the screen, okay? Look at this. Emotional connection, 12 steps, okay? First thing is first. Care about what others' needs and desires are, right? Share openly your emotions. You listen actively and hear each other out. You know each other deeply. Interested in likes and hobbies. All about the little details. Judgment-free zone. Silver lining to conflict. Sympathetic to their experiences. 50-50 partnership and effort. You feel seen and understood, and you know yourself well. Here's a problem we're going to have first and foremost. It is this area here. Because when it comes to dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance and even anxious people, the insecure attachments, because the fourth one is secure, they know themselves, okay? Everybody want to be a secure person. Well, I say that everyone, not everyone, but And the problem is they don't know themselves, right? Dismissives and fearfuls don't know themselves. And the reason why they don't know themselves, and anxious people too, they don't know themselves because when they were younger, they were robbed of the opportunity of being able to really formulate their identity in terms of the emotional aspect, learning about self. And so, for instance, Devon lost his father at 15. Now, he would have had a lot of time, around that. But remember, before his father passed, what you didn't know is his parents actually divorced. Ooh. Now, that's something. His parents actually divorced before his father passed at 36. Now, he was a very young man at that point, right? And so you have to understand that at that point, a 15-year-old young boy, he needs his father. He wants to spend time with his father. He's learning the ways of his father. And that is his role model, right? Quote unquote, even hero. And so now the father passes, that sets a trauma in, right? In terms of intimacy and how we connect to people, because that is one of your greatest fears. But remember, already there was a divorce in process. So how close was he to his father in that respect in terms of emotional connection? What did he actually learn? And then so now he's gone into a relationship with Meagan. He actually speaks about this word. He said he had a rage at the time of his younger age. And the reality of the situation is, in between that aspect, is that when you are not working on that intimacy, because that comes through developing in relationships with people, right? And you focus on being celibate, not trying to have sex with people, right? The focus becomes not having sex, but it doesn't become actually connecting with people and learning and understanding that. And knowing thyself is important. That's one aspect. But because I believe dismissive avoidant or fearful avoidant, whichever one you two will look at, right? The difficulty with that is they struggle in the area of, for instance, sharing their little details, okay? They struggle in the area of allowing people to know them deeply, okay? All right? They struggle in the area of sharing open their emotions. So what ends up happening is they become a mystery in dating. Women love men who are mysterious, but unfortunately, a lot of the mysteriousness is not because he's mysterious. It's because he's not emotionally connected, and you're not emotionally connected. That's why you like his mysteriousness, right? So now we've got Devon Franklin in that space, and I'm going to put it back onto the clip, and I'm going to put back onto the video for you guys to listen a bit more, so you can hear his viewpoints on that, and then we're going to go on to Meagan in a second or two, as well. Let's have a look before it doesn't play. Okay, so as you heard him say, listen, oh, sorry, I realized I didn't play the clip. I was playing it, but you didn't hear nothing. I do apologize. I was listening, but not hearing nothing. Okay, hold on. Let me just skip it back a little bit so you guys can hear it as well, okay?
And to receive, the gift of my wife, and I think a lot of that had to do with the residual processing, the emotional impact of what I dealt with. And so in being married, it's been a great opportunity, especially with her, where she creates an environment in the marriage where I can be myself.
Now let's pause right there. This is really important. So as he describes, he says, okay, look, you know what? There's obviously a residual aspect when it comes to this relationship, a residual processing that had to happen with his father, right? Which even didn't necessarily take place until he was married. Now, of course, I think marriage is actually a great place to actually do this because you have the safety of each other. The problem is that sometimes we can choose someone out of our trauma. And I'm really struggling with this. This is something I'm really trying to make sure I don't do because it's hard not to. Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. This is why I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just really highlighting something. And so even with all the preaching he may do, remember, he started preaching at 15, right? What did you know at 15? Not only that, how did he didn't obviously clearly wasn't necessarily processing the grief as he needed to because it's actually bleeding into the marriage. So maybe he didn't have time to really process that because he went straight into something else. He threw himself into the arts, threw himself into the creativity, threw himself into preaching. And if you know anything about preaching now, you now have to live to a standard. And remember, he says this on another video where he felt like, he was living a life that he wasn't actually preaching. He said that. Fair enough, because we've all been there. But that means also at the same time, maybe he wasn't able to deal with the things he needed to deal with because he was so focused on preaching and trying to be perfect, because in the four walls of church and ministry, you got to be perfect, that you don't actually get to deal with yourself, right? You don't get to deal with what's actually happening within yourself. Now, what's really interesting is that if that's the case, right, there probably was a fear of abandonment for him too, and an inability to be able to express his emotions and share himself openly, and that can take a toll on your partner as well, right? Because your biggest fear is rejection. And what you may not realize is shame, guilt, and embarrassment are very much emotions that a dismissive avoidant person will feel, and they will struggle to open their mouth to say what they need and what they actually want in a relationship. Now, one thing I say that both of them actually have said is that they've been very accepting of each other. And I believe it. I absolutely 100% believe it. Absolutely believe it. Okay, that they're both as accepting of each other, and they've formed a safe space for both of themselves to be able to be themselves. Now, listen a bit more. Listen to what Meagan ends up saying in this situation as well, right? Because she speaks a little bit as well about the situation, and I'm also going to get her viewpoint. Hold on here, so you can actually hear her perspective as well, because she actually says piece 2.
Even the way that he said that, because it was very similar for me too. Mm-hmm. I grew up with my dad is very much a part of my life, but, my parents separated and divorced when me and my sister were 4 and 6. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of always been out of the house. His job was extremely time consuming, and the relationship became what it is now.
Now, as you just heard from Meagan Good herself, right? Her father also, separated from her mother. The father obviously had an extremely demanding job. So what she's really saying is, he didn't have time for me, right? So even though he's separated, he didn't really have time for me. And so unfortunately, again, we've got the same process on both sides, right? And what we're seeing is people avoiding necessarily the emotions aspect, or avoiding going deeper into emotional aspect. And that creates because there's been emotional neglect. When a child has been neglected emotionally from their needs, the child has to find a way of surviving in that environment, because it's a very big thing. And so what the child will end up doing is it will internalize what's happened to it. So let's say your parents split up, right? Parents divorced. Parents went their separate ways. What will end up happening is a child may feel like, they're no longer a priority, or they may feel like they may feel like a burden on their parents because they've split and they don't want to cause any more issues. And then what ends up happening is that child may not speak up because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to express what they're feeling. And the parent also may not be aware because, again, they're going for a divorce and a separation and in different houses. And so what ends up happening, the child then goes, well, my needs are not being met emotionally. In order to survive, I need to suppress them and put them aside. Don't worry about it. Right? Don't worry about it. Okay? And what can end up happening is that the child will then learn how to operate in a more logical place. But the problem is, emotions are still there. They're just suppressed. Now, what's really interesting is how I see Meagan acting with Devon. She's very touchy and very feely, and in fact, she's always next to him, very close to him. And something I realized is that I think, and that's why I said that she's more fearful avoidant, because they carry both the anxious and they carry the dismissiveness as well, right? So fearful avoidance, their fear is being unloved, and one of their biggest things is that they both carry the anxious and the avoidant traits. But whenever I saw them two together, body language wise, they're very close, very together. But I always see her like kind of almost clinging to him. You know what I mean? Like she's almost clinging to him. And that told me, and there was a video that I watched, and it wasn't like the worst thing that ever happened. It just opened my mind to say this could be a reason why things happened within the course of the relationship that were probably deeper than they may have realized that are happening in terms of intimacy. Remember, again, he's always talking about the weight, but the reality of the situation is, what kind of intimacy were you actually having? What kind of intimacy were you actually kind of understanding? And now something happened in this video. Yes, I got it. Fantastic. And I'm going to show you guys. Just watch this. I want you to pay attention to what's actually happening here. Okay. Now look at the body language here. Who's leaning into who? Go back and watch any video with Devon Franklin and Meagan, and you see that Meagan's always leaning into him. I think that's a bit of her anxious side. Not saying that it's bad. I'm saying that's her anxious side, I think, kind of coming through, right? Watch what happens here, okay?
Yeah. Wait. Okay, there we go. Are y'all still there? Sharks, any questions, man?
How did you all deal with temptation during celibacy while dating each other?
Yeah.
A lot of different ways.
Turn around over here.
I can't be comfortable there.
I know, but I'm trying to get you a shot. There we go. Okay. See, y'all are keeping it real. There we go. All right, how do we deal with temptation?
Now, let me tell you this. We're keeping it real. I don't know what that was. I think, again, that's partly because of his church upbringing, that kind of, we have to always keep an image. But I also think that's a bit of his dismissive side coming a little bit as well. Like the inability to really understand dismissives can be empathetic, but sometimes they forget and they kind of miss certain things. But that moment, he didn't read it very well at all. Like, did you see her facial expression? Like, I'll rewind it for you. Her facial expression told everything we need to know. Her facial expression said, what the hell are you doing? Look how she's leaning into him, right? Look how she's all into him. She's showing him that she's wanting that intimacy from him. But if you know anything about dismissives, they don't like too much people clawing their space and covering them. Now, what's really interesting, the reason why I think she's a fearful avoidant, I'm going to show it to you in a few seconds, but let's just finish this topic here.
Different ways.
Turn around over here.
Watch her face.
Be comfortable there.
I know, but I'm trying to get you a shot. There we go. Okay.
She said she can't be comfortable, babe. Watch her face.
Y'all are keeping it real.
She's like,
There we go.
we're keeping it real. I don't know why he had to turn her body that way. There was no need. He was doing image, and maybe that's something that he needs to work on, because I didn't get that. She was comfortable where she was, and she was cool. Hold on.
Well, no.
Sorry about that. I realized that this thing's got a button. I didn't realize it's got a button. And so that again was part of what I was looking at. I was like, okay, maybe he doesn't like that closeness too much. I don't know, but it's still kind of attached anyway. But it's just the way that he just kind of broke the connection in that moment. It's something that a dismissive will do. It's something that a dismissive will do. End up breaking the connection in that little bit of a moment. Now, I want to play another clip for you guys because this was also something that kind of made me think about why I believe she was a fearful avoidant, and I'm going to give you a conclusion as to why I think this marriage is also why it kind of gets to a head. Okay, so let's just bring this clip here. Pay attention to this. Okay.
What type of advice would you give to those who are having those preconceived notions?
Yeah, I mean, that for me was definitely a concern. That was one of the things I was concerned about most was, you know, if I get in marriage, am I going to lose my free spiritedness? Am I going to lose my boldness? Am I going to lose my fearlessness? Everything that I really loved about myself in my 20s. I was, afraid that those things would kind of be like dimmed or my light would be dimmed. And then when I thought of what I thought submission meant at the time, I was like, oh man, I don't know. And what I found in marriage was that I'm so much.
Okay, so what do I believe happened here? If you listen very carefully, it's not the first time she speaks about this. If you ever watch her interviews, she talks about this on a few occasions where she says her fear was going into marriage that she will lose her identity. Now, I think there's a lot of women who do believe that going into a marriage, if they're career women, that they will end up losing their identity. But coupling it with the fact that her fear was being abandoned by her husband, the same way her dad was abandoned her mother, tells me there's a fear there. Now, that fear here in this instance is being enmeshed. Now, funny enough, only dismissives and fearful avoidants have the fear of being enmeshed. Anxious people don't care. They like to be enmeshed. Okay, they like the codependency. But fearful avoidants actually have codependent kind of tendencies sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes. Because their anxious side, which wants and craves to be validated within a relationship and wants to cling on to people, also plays a role in their relationships. So she can both be anxious and avoidant. And so one of the avoidant aspect of her is that do not crowd me. I'm a free spirit. I want to do what I want to do. I have my own ideas and etc. And I still want my autonomy, which is what both dismissives and fearful avoidants share, hence why they're called avoidants. And so when I heard that, and I heard that in several interviews, I said, that's a king point right there. Now, she's also said that he hasn't necessarily been trying to crowd her. He hasn't been somebody who he's actually encouraged her. So he hasn't necessarily like diminished her light or anything like that, or crushed her. He's actually encouraged her, according to her own words. So that fear didn't necessarily come to pass because he's allowed her to be who she needs to be. She kept her name as well. Of course, that's her acting name, Meagan Good. But so, there doesn't seem to be that particular aspect, but it's again a highlight of that fear contributing towards, I believe, what their actual baselines. Now, if I believe that they're both dismissive and fearful avoidant, why am I saying this is the reason why they actually broke up? Well, let me say this now. Dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance are very similar, right? They have very similar traits, but the way they react is very different, right? Fearful avoidants are afraid of being not loved, and dismissives are afraid of being rejected. Now, what do you do when you're in fear? Well, the reality is you try to control a scenario or you try to avoid it, hence why we dismiss avoidance. And so what can end up happening is intimacy can be missed in the relationship. Remember, we need connection. And so when people are beginning to project and read into your behavior, they can start to feel some type of way, okay? Now, I was reading, not even reading, I was going back to that interview with Shannon Sharp. Let's just listen a bit more.
And it's just like, I don't understand this. And so it was a lot of prayer, a lot of evaluation, a lot of learning about myself even. It was a lot.
Okay, so Meagan Good obviously talks about, not understanding per se, because, there's a lot of time where she was, praying, learning, and actually she actually comes on to say that she felt angry at God at a point in time, right? And the reason why she felt angry at a point in time is because she'd been praying, she'd been, trying to really understand. And, it's funny because she actually says her worst fear was the divorce, right? Of getting divorced just like her father, right? And if I'll play a skip here so you can listen.
And I was mad at God. I was like, what the hell? Like, I was so mad, but I was just like.
But you never questioned it.
I didn't question.
Now, the reason why she was mad at God is because in another clip, she talks about how she had prayed, she had fasted, she had allowed God to tell her who her husband was, she had quit smoking, she had become celibate, she had, left the drinking as well. Like, she had completely done a 360, a complete change, which is quite interesting because the way she started dressing towards the end of the relationship told us that she was no longer going to suppress herself anymore, which means that maybe also at the same time her fear of not being, and bear in mind, I heard in a video, and I don't know if I have it up there anymore, but there was a video where she said she didn't feel like she was good enough. Now, this is also very important because it's also a fearful avoidant trait. They don't feel they're good enough because self-worth has been questioned. They don't feel they're good enough. And so because they don't feel like they can be loved, their self-worth comes into question. And so she said she didn't feel good enough for Devon Franklin when she first met him at first, right? She wasn't sure. She didn't feel good enough. Now, what does that do in a relationship? Well, when you're in a relationship, when you feel that insecure, right, you can cling on too much, or you can do behaviors, and fearful avoidance like to test. They love a good test. They will test you to see if you're loyal. They'll test you to see if you still care about them. They'll test you to still love them. They do like to do little mini tests, little manipulative tests. And what that can do is that can cause stress on the relationship, right? They can have mood swings, right? They can have they have a failure to emotionally regulate very well sometimes, right? So they can have volatility in their emotions. They don't often know all the time what they're feeling. And this can create tension in a relationship because a dismissive avoidant hates volatility. So it's like your emotions going up and down after a while can become frustrating for the dismissive avoidant. Neither's right or wrong. It's just that they can't deal with each other, right? So her volatility in emotions might make him feel some type of way. His inability to deal with volatility because he wants to be very even kill can also make her feel some type of way, right? She can feel like she's been rejected and that she's not being loved. And fearful avoidants need unconditional love. Okay, and you hear her say this actually later on when she talks about Tyler Perry giving her worth. But they need to feel this unconditional, almost this quote unquote unconditional love that the person will be there no matter what. Now, of course, we ain't gonna be there no matter what. But the reality of the situation is what they want. Okay, because they've not felt that from their childhoods. But a dismissive avoidant will feel some type of way because when you're doing certain behaviors, they're hurting them and causing them to feel rejected, and they start to drift. This is why I believe that none of them did anything wrong. They said it. Nobody did anything wrong. We just got to a place where we ended up saying we want a divorce. So nobody cheated. Nobody did anything wrong. Tells me everything I need to know. They drifted, right? He had enough of her volatility, maybe ups and downs, and maybe her way of testing and quote unquote, maybe the way she looks at life. And she also felt like she was probably, he didn't get the unconditional love and support she wanted from him and continuous behavior because he ended up actually filing for divorce. And that's kind of crazy. Oh, he actually ended up filing divorce. She did not want to get divorced. Meagan told us she did not want to get divorced. She did not want to leave that relationship. Now, another thing about fearful avoidance is they struggle to leave relationships. Okay? They struggle. They struggle to really be able to leave relationships. Now, let's go back. I want to show you because she said she was mad at Devon Franklin. Okay? Let's just play this clip here. Here we go.
God has allowed it for a good reason. And I think that we both have grown from it tremendously. I think that now, I think that at the time I was so mad at Devon, but now I think what he did was very brave. And
so as you know, she said she was very angry at Devon Franklin at the time, but now she believes it's very, very brave. Why? Because in this moment, in this time, he decided to do something that maybe she realized that she needed to do himself. Now, I don't think they should divorce. I think if they got somebody who understood their attachment styles, dismissive versus fearful avoidant, maybe they could have worked it out again. I believe that she heard from God. I do. I just believe that they both have triggers and it triggers each other. And the problem is they both got hurt. Right? And I think they both struggle to be able to recover to be in that space. His inability to maybe speak up, say what he wants and he needs and be able to have that met. There's another clip. Oh my gosh. Okay, my final clip. Why I say this, right, is because it was so small. But it was, when people make jokes, I want you to pay attention. When your partner makes a joke, they are not joking. Okay? Be very, very aware that when your partner makes jokes, don't take it for joke. They're being serious most times. Okay? All right? And this is really funny because what happened was they were talking on Black Love. And on Black Love, they were making a joke. And I wanted to show you this joke. Oh my gosh, if I can get this internet to work for me. And about cooking. Okay, now of course, I know, I hear it, I get it. Don't get it twisted. We fully understand that she had a busy schedule and she was working a lot. But it's not that. What I'm talking about, okay, is the need, the need and the wants that may not have been said but are now being joked about, okay, and then concessions been happening. Listen to this, okay, listen to this, okay. Here we go.
Next thing you know, it's like the meals were few and far between, and then there was no food at all, and I had to go fend for myself. That's the truth.
No, let's put this in perspective. We got married.
Okay, cool. They make a joke about the food, right? And he says, obviously, you know, she was cooking at one point. You know, she started cooking a little bit, a lot, and then suddenly she started dwindling the cooking down. Like, you know, she started, you know, because of work, and she'd be on set for 18 hours. The cooking isn't the issue. It's what it means. See, what we don't realize is that both fearful and dismissives are going to attach a meaning, a narrative to a behavior. So maybe when she started cooking less, he started feeling more rejected, but didn't actually say he started feeling more rejected. Instead, he came up with a solution and said, let's just get rid of the gender roles. Let's kind of like, let's remove the constraints of gender roles. Now, that doesn't solve your issue, because it's an internal issue. You are attaching a meaning to that behavior. Did we discuss how I feel rejected, or maybe I felt some type of way? Bear in mind, he never said this, but I'm just kind of adding something to it. Did he discuss that? Did he let her know that maybe I feel some type of way when you're not cooking, right? Because it makes me feel like I'm being rejected. Or maybe he attached the fact that his mum, you know, he had all the women around him catering to him in a certain way when he was 15 and onwards, that when Megan's not necessarily catering to him, he might have liked the freedom at first, but then maybe he realized actually he wanted what his mother was, right? So you have to look at that from perspective, right? There's more to the story. So anyway, let me leave it there. I just thought I'd bring that home. Hopefully you guys have got a bit more understanding. I'm not saying that's definitely the truth, but it just felt like that was what I was looking at, dismissive versus fearful avoidance. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, click on the bell button for notification of uploads. We appreciate you guys. Stay locked, slowly. We'll see you again very, very soon. And don't forget, listen, we've got some coaching we're doing right now. My diary's actually booked up for the next 3 months. Book yourselves in, okay? All right? Because before you know it, 6 months wait, okay? All right? I appreciate you guys. Stay locked, slowly.